In situations where a BLS entity provides the transport of a Medicare beneficiary and an ALS entity provides a service that meets the definition of an ALS service, for example, an ALS assessment, ALS intervention, or paramedic intercept, Medicare states in the Medicare Benefit Policy Manual, Chapter 10, Section 10.5, that the BLS supplier may bill Medicare the ALS rate, provided that a written agreement between the BLS and ALS entities exists prior to submitting the Medicare claim. While the manual states that Medicare does not regulate the compensation between the BLS entity and the ALS entity, we do point out that the OIG, in Advisory Opinion 12-12, has suggested that if the BLS supplier's payment under the joint billing agreement exceeds Medicare's BLS allowed amount, there may be some question as to whether this agreement might implicate the anti-kickback statute. If no agreement exists between the BLS ambulance supplier and the ALS entity, then only the BLS level of payment may be made. In this situation, the ALS entity's services are not covered, and the beneficiary is liable for the expense of the ALS services to the extent that these services are beyond the scope of the BLS level of payment. However, it's important to note that CMS does not require that the agreement be in place prior to providing the service, but rather prior to submitting the claim. Therefore, if your organization finds itself in this situation prior to having considered entering into a joint billing agreement with the other entity involved, you certainly have the opportunity to negotiate and finalize the agreement after providing the service, as long as it's completed prior to submitting the claim. A question often arises as to whether this joint response rule applies in a situation where a patient receives a medically necessary ALS assessment at the scene and a paramedic determines that no ALS interventions are necessary and releases the patient to BLS care and transport. CMS clearly stated in the Federal Register in discussing the ambulance fee schedule final rule that according to the definition of ALS assessment, an assessment may result in the determination that no ALS level service is required, and in that instance, an ALS-1 emergency level payment may be made to the transporting BLS ambulance supplier, even if no ALS paramedic rides on board. Thanks for watching.